you mentioned education before. The president said in his tweet this morning that he might take funding away. First of all, why would he want to take funding away from schools? Second of all, which funding is he referring to specifically? And thirdly, what authority does he have to do that, given that most public schools are funded by local property taxes?
So I would note that what I said to Kristen just a bit ago, he wants to increase funding in CARES for education, but he's looking at potentially redirecting that to make sure it goes to the student, and it is most likely tied to the student and not to a district where schools are closed. And I would note that he said this is something he may consider in the tweet.
No, I heard what you said with regard to CARES, but with regard to the president, he was saying that as I guess a threat if Democratic governors or officials don't open schools in the way that he wants them. I'm just wondering, again, what authority he would use to do that and which specific funds he's targeting.
Yeah, not in the ways that he'd want them to open. He wants them to reopen altogether. He wants students to be welcomed back to these schools because there are real consequences. Let's be clear about what we're talking about here. We're talking about a situation where you have the American Academy of Pediatrics talking about the negative impacts of children not in schools. Learning deficits is among them. There's increases in child and adolescent physical or sexual abuse because you don't have people reporting and notifying, like teachers and PE teachers and school personnel notifying health departments when they see signs of this. You have increased substance abuse, depression, and suicidal ideation, and this is from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So the president, he's going to push schools to reopen. These are grave consequences. Even CNN reporting that experts believe that the recent decline in calls to child abuse and neglect hotlines might really mean more cases are going unnoticed. This is unacceptable, and our schools are essential, and our teachers are essential workers, and he wants them to open, and that's why he's speaking out so strongly about this.
Ah yes, when Trump threatened to cut off funding to schools, what he actually meant was he wanted to increase funding. Got it. This is Trump's press secretary yet again twisting herself into pretzels in defense of her boss, this time in the aftermath of Trump's overt threat to cut off funding to schools that don't reopen in the middle of a pandemic. He took to Twitter writing, "In Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and many other countries, schools are open with no problems. The Dems think it would be bad for them politically if US schools open before the November election, but it is important for the children and families, may cut off funding if not open." Now, let's just think about this for a second. Why might Germany, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden be reopening their schools and the US not? Maybe, just maybe, it has something to do with the fact that yesterday, Germany had 298 new cases, Denmark had 10, Norway had 11, and Sweden had 57. The United States had 55,442. Might that have something to do with the fact that they can reopen their schools and we can't? Consider, too, that countries like Germany took the virus seriously in the beginning. They had a nationwide testing system, they had enough PPE, they had leaders who weren't too insecure to promote social distancing and mask wearing, or too short-sighted to not politicize the virus. We had none of those things. Trump is like a child who saw a sibling get rewarded for doing their chores, and even though he didn't do his chores, he wants a reward too. And he cannot comprehend why he's not getting one. Someone should explain to our full-grown 74-year-old president that if you do not do the work, you do not receive any of the benefit. And beyond the obvious absence in common sense here, there's also the fact that Trump accuses Democrats of politicizing school reopenings, claiming that Democrats think it would be bad for them politically if our schools open before the November election. First of all, the fact that Trump is invoking politics here is as big a tell as you can ask for. Of course the guy is bringing up politics because everything is about politics for him and everything is an opportunity for projection for him. And second of all, this is clearly not about politics for Democrats, it's about not sending children into a pandemic. Period. And the fact that Trump still, after 130,000 deaths, cannot wrap his head around that is the entire problem in and of itself. And as if the first tweet wasn't diluted enough, he went on tweeting, "I disagree with the CDC on their very tough and expensive guidelines for opening schools. While they want them to open, they are asking schools to do very impractical things. I will be meeting with them." In other words, we have Donald Trump admitting that he doesn't want to follow guidelines from the agency literally put in place to keep us safe. So we can either trust an agency full of medical experts in charge of public health, or the guy who can't manage to get through a single tweet with all the words spelled correctly. A guy who thought we could nuke hurricanes. A guy who stared directly into a solar eclipse. Should I go on? Now, Kayleigh goes on with the usual deflections, claiming that there are consequences to children not going to school. And look, Of course there are consequences to not going to school. Of course progress goes down. Of course that is not a good thing. But the bigger threat right now than learning deficiencies or depression is the deadly virus sweeping across the country. Yes, not going to school may lead to a temporary instance of learning deficiency, but you're not going to catch that by a microscopic droplet and possibly die from it. The fact that we need to have an argument about prioritizing lives over education is insane. These things are not the same, and this administration's desperation to convince you that they are, that exposing yourself to a pandemic is the same thing as taking another semester to do virtual learning, is all the proof you need that they do not care about your children's lives. What we've seen since day one of this outbreak is a continued assault on every age group of the American people. Trump's initial failure to contain the outbreak endangered the elderly, then his push to reopen businesses endangered the working age population, and now his insistence that schools reopen too early endangers children. For a party that brands itself pro-life, a party that screams all lives matter, it sure doesn't seem like they care about anyone at all. If you like that video, please check out my brand new podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I'll cover the most important political stories of the week and interview major players in the world of politics. Available now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check it out and subscribe now.